So, good morning, everybody. I am delighted that you're joining Z and I for a conversation about kink for the heart. Uh, my name is Caroline Carrington. I'm a certified Neo-Tantra educator that's passionate about fusing practices like Bhakti Yoga and classical Tantra into very modern day practices focused around sacred sexuality and celebrating the divine in all forms of eros, including expressions such as kink, which are very sacred to me. I'm thrilled that we have the beautiful Z with us here today. Uh, I'm going to let Z share a little bit more about sort of their official bio in a moment. But we've been having these hour-long, or sometimes multiple hour-long chats, kind of late into the night, around our own journeys and explorations and the evolutions of the ways we integrate many of the communities we're in that seemingly don't speak to each other. And then I was really enraptured by some of the concepts that Z is really pushing the label with and really moving the culture forward with. And I was like, we need to let people into these awesome conversations and share them with the world so we're not just having them on our own. I'm gonna, even though I told you kind of what the outline would be, I'm gonna flip that and let you introduce yourself a little bit, Z, and I'll come back with
Okay,
a
great.
personal story or two after that.
Great. I'm like really taking in the sound of the birds behind you too. I'm like,
Right?
there's a party going on. It's like, wow. I had a moment of like, are those outside okay. Um, I'm grateful to be with you all and to meet more people in Caroline's community. So thanks for being with us. Um, so I what to know about me. Um, my I'm a dancer and a kink educator, and I think the simplest way to share it is um, that I have just had a lot of energy and passion, and I was like, oh gosh, I want to learn some things so that I don't make a mess with it. Right, because it's like I really like connecting with people. I like big energy. And the last 21 years, I've been exploring guiding people around dance and sexuality and kink and cultural change. And so I now call my work Embody More Love. And it's a spiritual, it's a spiritual kinky dance community for cultural liberation. And that's kind of the umbrella that I'm living with at this moment. Yeah.
Mm, already so much I could dive in just from that. But I want to take people back a step um, to when we first met. And it's really interesting as we were preparing today. I said to Z, there are a number of different stories we could tell about that. And when I went in one of those long conversations, I kind of forgot the very first way that we met and thought that initially it was like, you know, we both studied with Barbara Carellis at Urban Tantra. So I was like, maybe it's through that. And then I remember back in the day, you attended uh, a neo tantra and kirtan offering that I did with another colleague, and for a while I remembered those as our first meetings. But I'm gonna let you share, given that it was your
Yeah. Yeah.
experience.
I was like, no, Caroline, that's not how we met.
Well, you corrected me recently on the
So,
phone, and I thought our viewers may enjoy hearing the story of our
yeah,
first meeting.
well, we met because um, I was living with one of our metamors at the time, and I heard these amazing sounds through the ceiling. And I was like, I want to meet that person. Like, who is having so much vocal passion and energy moving? And then Caroline proceeded to come down the stairs. Oh, a metamor, thanks for the question, is someone that we're both lovers with. So yeah, like a more to love and meta around. So it's like a shared person we both love. And so I was like, it sounds like someone's having a really good time and I want to meet them. And then Caroline comes down and I'm like shirtless in the kitchen. And the first thing Caroline says is, gosh, I would be so worried about burning myself cooking without a shirt. Like, this is our initial, like, who are you? You know? Yeah. And then, you know, we met in more formal spaces as well, but there was a similar delight that brought us together. So
I love
yeah.
this word delight because one of the images that I have for you, you being very well behaved today, Z, but is of Tigger. When when Z isn't especially grounded, they can like bounce around and have a lot of energy, and it's actually really fun to be around. I love that you're both able to be super grounded and also be delighted and excited and kind of exploding all over the place, which is it's
Thank
just
you.
really endearing. So I felt like, as opposed to the super formal introductions, it was important to speak to that. So I loved, you and I played around with kink for the heart. And let's even start with, what do you and I mean by what is kink? Because it could be a kink, as in like a kink in the armor of the heart. What does kink mean to you?
Well, I'm so funny. I'm pulling this note over because it's a definition that I've been working with for a while, and um, I want to share it with you all. Kink for me is our sexual desires, activities, and behaviors that challenge social approval and give us the opportunity to explore our courage, our shame, our pleasure, and our liberation. So for me, it's way less about the activity, but more about the way that it lives in that gap between who we really are and who we're told to be. And by doing so, it invites us into the edge play of our authentic expression. That's what interests me about it.
Well, I love this broader and really inclusive way you're using the term. Um, and I like the playful way you're using concepts from BDSM, like edge play. I'm sure we're going to talk about rope at least once in this, as a big,
We'll
as a big
see.
rope fan, the big rope fan that I am. Um, but yeah, some people, I mean, I remember the very first time that I was even introduced to something like BDSM. Um, I wasn't that excited about it. I'd grown up with a lot of abuse in my childhood, and this idea that like people whacking on each other could be hot and sexy just didn't really make any sense to me at all. So, just for some of the people that may be joining this or watching the replay, um, I think I want to ask what does BDSM mean to you, and uh, why do you enjoy it?
Great.
You wanted edge
I
play,
wasn't ready for
baby.
those questions. Here we are. So I I knew this would kind of come forth in some way, but I had an injury this year from kink, and and I won't get into the details of it, but it was a near death experience. And I thought, if there were ever a moment in my life for me to leave this path, it would be now. But that's not what happened. Kink for me is a spiritual path, and in my recovery, um, this year from that moment, I have just turned towards it with even more curiosity. And so I think what kink is for me is deep permission to play and explore. And there's often a dissonance between what my body actually wants and how it responds, its own intuition, versus the more socialized concepts I have about what I'm supposed to like. Right. And so I had been touring a solo show for a few years, and there's a line in that show where I talk about my first face slapping scene, and where one of my dear friends and colleagues and beloveds slapped my face. And I thought, well, at the time I was identifying as a woman. And I said, gosh, women aren't supposed to like getting slapped in the face, but my pussy knew that was not true, and it's like, that to me is what is so fascinating about kink. It's like when our body calls us to a truth that we like, oh, for real, I got to reckon with this truth right now, and so for me, it's a call to truth. And that means it's a call to connection. Because truth is how we get connected, so yeah, that's what it means to me. And that's what I like about it. I like about it those moments where we stumble a little bit because we do get disoriented in who we thought we were. And that's the juicy part. And then it calls us to a new experience. Yeah, truth is how we get connected. Yeah, that was new. Thank you for yeah. And that's what really interests me in it.
I love that. I notice in my own journey with BDSM, like there's some kinds of pain that aren't fun. I remember very distinctly the last time I was paddled. It will never happen again. It just and I'm not making anybody wrong if they like paddling, but it reminded me of my abusive childhood. It was not sexy in the least. And there were a whole lot of other things. I was getting quite hot and bothered when you talked about face slapping, for example. That I often say to people, like, just try something. Just try it out and then see if you like it. Because it was in my own exploration of sampling some of the delicacies and the toys and the connections available that then told me, like, is this something that does take me deep in an inquiry of myself or my connection with another? I like to use rope often as a means to transcend language or cultural differences, and the conversation happens through the rope and through the energy play there. And I even like, there's this whole idea that, empowered, I'm just going to use heterosexual example, but like empowered women don't want to be subservient to men, but it's really potent if you choosing, regardless of your resonant gender, but you're choosing to offer that up in devotion. Oh, I've just thought of another story I want to tell them. But it's about you. By the way, I did ask before we got on, like, is there anything I can't ask?
Like, not that I can think of.
Yeah, now.
If you start going, I'll be like, red, I use the same
Great.
word.
So
but I'm sorry. Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Jump in for a sec?
Yeah.
I was recently looking back at classes I had taught, and about 9 years ago, I rediscovered and remembered that I had taught a class called Dominance and Submission for Feminists and Other Powerful People. And I was like, really? I forgot I had taught that, right? And I'd actually taught it with the person who would face slap me, right? And it was interesting, but it's just an example of like, what do we need to say to get our brains to relax so that we can be more immediately connected to our experience? Yeah.
Yes. And more present in the now. That's one of, for me, the gifts with kink is that, for example, if you happen to be playing with pain I happen to like caning, for example. You're really exquisitely present in the moment to feel that the first. I get excited at the sound of the cane moving through the air, even that. Anyway, and then it lands on the skin and you just get a sensation of pain. And then there's a pause. And then this beautiful, warm feeling. Oh, resonates out. Anyway, but you can see I've literally sat in that moment and really expanded that. And you'll notice as Z and I are talking today, we might be talking about things like meditation that don't necessarily follow traditional this is how you meditate with your back up straight, sitting in full lotus position, with your eyes closed, desperately trying to empty your mind for an hour. It's really awesome if that practice works for you. And I do a lot of dynamic practices that get me to stillness. But I think it's also really important to expand our understanding of what meditation even can be. And I know, Z, with both you and I, we dance in a lot of different communities that don't really speak to each other. I hang out with bhakti yogis who are into chanting and Hindu deities and stuff. And in general, sexuality is not talked about. Brahmacharya, which is about like overcoming or releasing the attachment to worldly desires and grasping, that's sort of a much more important piece. But sexuality is deeply spiritual for me, as is kink, right? As is chanting mantras. So one of the things I appreciate about how you work in the world, and also how I'm watching your own work evolve, is this place of, yes, you've literally been trained. I mean, you went to Juilliard, right? To study dance. Right. So
Yeah.
you've put the time in.
I'm a professional dancer. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And right. And in some ways, I started training at the age of 2 as a dancer in a very rigorous way. But that is also an example of, in our culture, when you're socialized as white and female and you like to dance, the assumption is, great, let's send you to ballet, right? and then it's like, that was actually the beginning of extreme power play without negotiation, right? And then it took me going into the kink world to understand what could be possible with negotiation, that you could have the level of power play, right? Like people liken the ballet to the military often, with the kind of authority exchange that happens without conversation, especially when you're that young. I was dancing professionally for the Joffrey Ballet when I was 11. So there's a lot of, what you're speaking to, of like, we're weavers, we're bridgers between different communities. And there's a reason we're in those communities, because there's some magic and medicine in them that has us there. And then there are the blind spots that exist in those communities as well. And because we code switch and we move through a lot of different circles, that's the rich and exciting part, where then there's more perception. Like I did a lot of work around white privilege and anti-racism work for 20 years. That was actually one of the doorways that got me into kink, because that was the first place that I realized I could question that who I am and who I've been told to be are different. And how do I have the courage to move through that gap? And then that started to open up for me. How do I dismantle what I've learned about kink, about gender, about money, about time? Right now is the really alive one for me. But my circles tend to really move through communities that are deeply spiritual, dance communities, social activist and cultural change communities, and kink communities. Those are kind of like the 4 circles that I deeply like to weave, and now have created this intersectional space for.
Well, part of why I invited you to come and speak today as well is I really feel like, as I more deeply understand my own whiteness and my own privilege, you come from an incredibly clear and aligned place, but non-judgmental. Your languaging, like I notice sometimes out there in the world, I'm worried about saying the wrong thing, or like I come from South Africa. I grew up in apartheid. I've made a whole video about that for those of you who are interested, called Growing Up in Apartheid and Living in America Today. I was living in America at the time. And there's a lot for me to unpack. My dad's British. We colonized like a lot of the world. There's a lot of karma for me to rectify. And I feel like it can be an ongoing journey of discovery. And especially as I teach Neo Tantra, which a lot of it, a lot of people practicing are actually using cultural appropriation and not wanting to look at that part of it. I guess I'll also say, being in Mexico right now, this conversation around privilege and my whiteness, the fact that I earn dollars and I'm now living in a developing country, and I'm not just here to hang out with a bunch of expats. I actually want to be in Mexico. I have friends that, are Mexicana. And then looking at how that intersects even with money and power. So all these things, we're just starting to weave some threads together for all of you. It's really relevant. And I just love it that when I come to you, Z, I feel very safe, even if I have messed up or if there's something I'm not getting yet, to explore that with you. And that hasn't always been my experience with. Sometimes I just get faced with anger, which I also understand. People get tired of explaining. So I love it that we both dance in communities that don't necessarily speak to each other. And I feel this deep resonance with you and I seeing all of them as sacred, including the advocacy and social justice work.
Thank you. Yeah. One of the things I learned this year, I had a brain injury. That was the nature of my recovery this year. And I didn't have higher cognitive functioning. So I couldn't like have a conversation like this, right? I couldn't think about a lot of things. And I had to kind of learn how to live from my heart in a different way, which sounds really poetic, but in the moment, it wasn't that much of a choice. It was just kind of like, okay, I'm getting a tutorial right now on what it is to not run a lot of things through my analysis and to live that way, right? And in 1999 was when I started doing race work, and I didn't even realize I held the belief that I need to help everyone become more conscious so we can love each other better. It was almost like it has to start up here so that then our hearts can get online. And this last year, I learned that we don't have to wait for that. We can start loving each other better and the consciousness will come. And that is, as a person who is white this time around, like I know that if I be coming to people with my judgments about them, that is not how we build bridges, right? And so it's that space of how do I lead from my heart? And this is kink, what is kink for the heart? How do I lead with that edge play of compassion for folks that I don't agree with how they see the world? But how do I lead from my heart? And then from those relations, from building some trust and that they can sense that that I see their humanity, the level of conversation and relearning and opening consciousness now has a foundation because we've started in, I respect you, fellow human. We need that grounding for us. And I think when we were talking about what to call this conversation, for me, that place, part of what is so juicy about kink in the more familiar ways that we might think of it, whether that's knife play or rope or impact play, is that in those moments of going to our edge, what's interesting about them is that we draw in the submissive side, we draw on a connection to source and to our own resilience that feeds our ability to stay in that discomfort. And it's the same with race. It's the same with other anti-oppression work. There's a bridge there of, wait a second, I'm in an uncomfortable place. There's an intensity here about the truth of the condition of our human family. How do I, just like in a kink scene, come back to my internal resilience, my connection to source that gives me the internal presence and curiosity to make space for what is uncomfortable, so I can meet it with some grace and some presence. And to me, that is an important intersection in where our cultural liberation draws on these capacities that kink can give us. Not inherently, but it has the opportunity to give it when we bring that intention to it.
Right.
I'm very open for questions because I know that was a very big thought, but that is part of the juiciness of Kink for the Heart.
Yeah, so please feel free for now just to pop your questions in the chat as we're talking, and we'll open the floor more widely a little bit later. But you know, for those that are on this call and maybe wondering, like, wow, well, I haven't hung out in a dungeon and I've never done knife play. Like, I'm not into knife play, just so you know. I have trauma around knives, so not my jam. So it's okay to be into different things. But for those of you that are like, wow, well, am I even kinky? I know there are at least a couple of kinksters on here because I know some of you. But for those of you who are like, oh, I'm not into any of that weird stuff, like maybe you've just had a partner hold your arms down on a bed, or consensually pushing you up against a wall, or blindfolding you, for example. That is sensory deprivation. It's at a very gentle level versus, you know, putting you in a human vacuum machine with earplugs and a full-on mask. Like, that would be the other end of the spectrum. But it is actually, or even just wearing earplugs, or putting, I had a wonderful bondage session a couple of years ago, and they put headphones on with music for me. So I was totally engulfed in the experience and was blindfolded at the same time. So there's sort of ranges where you can play. I remember the first time I was ever even spanked during sex. I was really taken aback. It happened totally, I was pretty young. I was in my early 20s. I was like, what the hell did this person just do? And then I realized I liked it. And it just, again, it took me by surprise, because my only other context for that had been in an abusive situation in the home I grew up in. And there was nothing erotic about it. And I love how you shared earlier. I may not say it as eloquently as you did, but like, your pussy told you. Like, it's really interesting just noticing, if we do get our heads out of the way and be truly exquisitely present, which I think is what meditation is, in an experience of anything, but predominantly kink, it draws us exquisitely into the present, which is what a lot of these practices are actually aiming to do. I love that one of our participants is sharing, saying, using kink skills connects us to our own internal source and resilience. Oh, they are, this person is, I love it that they're pulling out quotes that you said, Z.
Thank you.
To be able to stay in the place of discomfort in many human situations. Can you speak to that from a trauma perspective for a moment? Because we're sort of touching in on trauma, and both you and I kind of geek out on that stuff.
Yeah, I can. And I also just wanted to point out that a lot of the examples you just gave about if you may be kinky are from the submissive perspective. And,
that's,
you know,
true.
Also offer, like, sometimes you know it because there's a quality of certainty and clarity and decisiveness that turns you on to bring to someone, right? Just to speak to that end of the spectrum as well, right? In your beautiful string of examples. So so can you, like, clarify the question? I know the topic is like trauma and kink, and there's so many
Yes.
ways to speak to that, and what would
Yeah.
serve
Well,
in this moment.
you've used the word resilience a few times, and that always maps to trauma for me because as a trauma survivor, one of the things that I've spent 12 years in therapy learning is how to be more resilient in the face of one of the definitions of trauma is something that is above your nervous system's capacity to navigate or manage, and you become
Yeah.
dysregulated or overwhelmed or triggered is what's often said in the lexicon. And I think I think the word triggered is a little overused sometimes, but triggered to a space where you are now not able to be resilient, to feel resourced, and you are, in trauma theory, they would say, outside of your window of tolerance.
Yeah. Great.
So, yeah, if you pivot off that and go.
Perfect. So I'm going to do a little relanguaging because language is very important and it can change our experience. So a lot of the language that you just used is very traditionally is familiar if you're in a therapeutic context, right? A window of tolerance. Who wants to tolerate things, right? So I want to call that a window of presence. And that is the window or the range of stimulation that we can have and still be present, right? So that might mean how much touch or how much added intensity or pressure or sound or new stimulation or new level of awareness, right? Can I be present for? And meaning that I could have a real life communication between my heart and my brain and my ability to respond, right? So another piece of that is we often think about the nervous system getting dysregulated, right? You've heard that languaging. And I'm like, who wants to have a nervous system? So I'm like, okay, we're going to call that the presence system. And instead of it being dysregulated, it's that the presence system, sometimes there's disharmony or harmony in my presence system. This is the new language I want to offer us, right? Because our presence system is the place where we can connect with others from, and where we can integrate and create meaning and relevancy between our experiences and who we really are and what's most important to us. And so when there's disharmony there, which in the old paradigm would be dysregulation in the nervous system, I'm calling that when there's disharmony in our presence system, there are certain things that we can choose to do either internally or with another person that can bring harmony in. Are you all with me so far? Is this okay? Great. Seeing some nods. So this idea oh yay, nice to see your face. Thanks. Yeah, so we can actually cultivate very simple things that add some harmony to our system. Some of that is through our breath. Starting to exhale longer than we've been inhaling. If you want to try that on just for a moment, if we empty our breath and just come into this is, and just the context, you can breathe as usual for a moment. But the context of this is almost an internal slowing down and spaciousness is kind of what we're going for. And that can be used to create more room for more play or more room for more truth, maybe a truth we don't really want to see yet, but how do I slow down and create spaciousness to turn towards a truth, right? So for example, the breath is just one way that we can do this. And when we start to exhale longer than we're inhaling, which we'll do together in a moment, you might notice that there's a little slowing down and a little more spaciousness inside for experience. So we can try that if you want. You don't have to, but we'll do it just for a few breaths together. So you might notice, you can have your eyes just softly or close them, whatever feels more resourcing for you or more comfortable. And we'll just inhale for 4 counts, and then we'll exhale with a little We'll try that again. Inhaling for 4 counts. Rhythm is really helpful. And then exhaling. Do that 2 more times. Inhale, soft inhale, and then exhale with a hum and vibrate. Last time, inhale softly. And exhale slow and long. And then just notice. I'll be quiet for a moment so you can just notice what you're experiencing. So that's just a little taste of how we can use rhythm and breath and our own vibration and sound to start to create more internal space. Thanks. Yeah. Does anyone want to share anything just from that little 4 breaths?
You can just unmute yourself if you'd like to share.
The hum is new. Cool. Ah, interesting. Subspace. Interesting. Yeah.
What's
Well, what I
subspace?
noticed, oh, sorry, please go ahead.
Sorry. What is subspace?
I would like to, people mean different things by it. So maybe the person who used that word, do you want to elaborate on what your experience was when you used that word? If you want.
Yes. Well, for me, it's a peaceful place where my breath does slow down. I usually use the term subspace in context of BDSM play, but it's where I can drop down into a meditative state, a peaceful state, and my breath does slow down, and it heightens senses, sensation, ability to perceive, and the spaciousness that you were talking about. I'm ready for whatever, and in a kinky context, I'm more ready to accept what normally would be pain, except I'm processing it so well that it's just increases the depth of my peaceful state, or dominance if there's trust. I can accept, happily the power coming at me and flow with it.
Beautiful. Thank you.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's like opening our receptivity.
I was fascinated, Z, with that practice, and I love that you picked something actually very accessible and quite simple. Even people watching the recording could try it and see what, what their experience is like. I play with sound vibration a lot because a lot of what I orient around, both in my work and in my personal practice, is mantra, which is sound vibration. And I've studied even something called nada yoga, which is meditation on the sound even before the mantra. But what came up for me, mantra being a tool for the mind, and that's some of what I was referencing with liking dynamic meditation to bring us to the stillness. So feeling the resonance, because I'm used to, in Neo Tantra, we often exhale through the mouth with sound, but you invited us to keep our mouths closed. Mm-hmm. And as we did that, I actually felt the resonance in my heart. And that reminded me, and you were saying to hum, and the mantra for the heart chakra, or the energy center of the heart, is hung or hum, depending on how you do it. But if you do it tantrically, it's hung. So I was feeling that resonance just with the humming. So it's really interesting just watching, even just with a small sample size of where it took different people. Same exercise took us to different but related places.
Yeah. Thanks for playing with that, everyone. Yeah. Well, this is not the most opportune moment, but I really have to pee. So pardon me for just a moment as I listen to my body. I'll be right back. I can hear you, but I'll be right back.
That's great. We were talking about truth and authenticity and transparency. So I'm going to speak a little, just as Z is taking exquisite care of themselves, just about what subspace is for me. And I'll also own that I do tend to speak a lot from the submissive perspective. It's the place I enjoy the most. I'm very dominant in the rest of my life, and I can switch. I can be dominant in the bedroom or in kink scenes, but because I hold a lot of erotic space for people in my private sessions, in my neo-tantra sessions, in my personal life, I actually really like to be submissive. But so subspace for me is a state of mind of feeling altered in my consciousness in relation. I don't think I've ever said this aloud in the same way, but in relation to the power dynamic. And as I offer through devotion my submission to the person in the dominant role, that allows me to start shifting into an altered state. So that can end up being through sensation play, but for me it often happens because of this power exchange. And I was actually particularly fascinated that one of our participants suggested that they got into subspace from that practice, because when I'm preparing to submit to somebody in a scene, I actually get my head right. I do a little meditation beforehand, and I literally start inviting myself into that submissive mindset, so that as I walk into the now negotiated scene, that I'm sort of mentally prepared. So it's not that the full state change has already happened, but that I'm already starting to shift my state of consciousness even before the connection between myself and the other person or persons. So Z, let's come back to this. I'm loving all the terms you're using. For example, like presence system versus nervous system. I might still use some of the old languaging, old paradigm languaging, just because I've been immersed in it so much. But I just love it, because a lot of the languaging in trauma theory actually like speaks to dysfunction a lot of the time. Like there's something wrong, like there's something bad or unhealed or so wounded that one can't recover. And that isn't necessarily true. I mean, I know trauma has been an incredible teacher for me and has actually birthed a lot of my work in the world. I work with a number of different trauma survivors, and I don't necessarily have to have had their direct experience, but I know how to be with that, because I know what that feels like in my body, and I can sit. So interesting in I find in tantric circles, and especially in neo-tantric circles, people want to be all about like the love and the light, and there's nothing wrong with that. Love and light are beautiful. And in classical tantra, they hang out in the cremation grounds and they smear ashes from the dead bodies all over them. And we forget about that part because it's sort of not talked about, right? And if we look at what's going on in India right now, just in the pandemic, it's like it's really in your face. And even if you're not in India, you can watch it in the news. I feel in many ways that even this very interesting time that we are living through, even though, you know, in this part of the world, we seem to have navigated at least to a time when it's when life is getting back to normal more, where things are actually pretty apocalyptic in India. But that the underbelly or the untruths or the unspoken things, and I feel like a lot of society tends to live there, we can't avoid them now because you're having to decide, are you vaccinating or not? Are you standing up for Black Lives Matter, or did you just go to a cool march when you were bored of staying home in the pandemic? Are you choosing, as a personal peeve of mine, but like, are you choosing to teach Neo-Tantra now, even though 25 million people are infected in India? Like, those are inquiries I feel like are important in, especially as a white person, like looking at that, like, what is my relationship to that? I'm not living in the US, so what is my relationship to privilege? And I'm just curious how you see trauma factoring into this all. That's a big question, but we're living in a time where there's a lot of collective trauma, even just from people losing loved ones. I know I grieved a lot as my business changed. I had to grieve leaving the home I'd known for 16 years and moving. I've watched my teenage son even be pretty traumatized. Like, there's a lot of just trauma on the airways, even just job losses, right? Or people losing people to this, to this virus. So I'm curious how you weave trauma and the gems that it can have to offer into this collective conversation we're having now, where the underbelly is being exposed in a lot of the world, where, like, one of the reasons, we haven't referenced this exactly, but we sort of hinted at the fact that you and I are ethically non-monogamous when we talked about having a metamour. You know, I wasn't cheating. We both knew what was happening. You came into the room after the exchange and sat down and had a little chat with me and the person I'd been engaging with. Like, it was literally that open. We welcomed you into the play space, right? And that seemed like the most normal thing. But for most people, that wouldn't be seemingly normal. That could even be traumatic for some people. So, speak to how you're seeing both trauma play out in the world right now, and how not to dismiss anybody's very real feelings about it, or the suffering people may be going through, but how we can harness that to actually use it as fuel or as energy to move things forward. Big concepts, I know.
How much time do we have?
We have some time.
Okay, great. Well, one thing I want to name about trauma is two people can have the exact same experience, and one can have experience trauma and the other not. And so trauma is about an internal organization of self in relation to an event or an accumulation of events. And the beautiful thing about that is that our internal worlds are dynamic. They change, they heal, right? It doesn't mean that we can go back and say that event now didn't happen, but the way that our present system relates to it can shift. And so that's an important thing to discern. So when we talk about there's a lot of collective trauma, yes, some of it is new, some of it is 400 years old or much longer. And yet the disruption in the familiar that has resulted from the pandemic has revealed where we're not steady with ourselves as a human family, right? It has revealed, right? And here's what I'm I want to speak to the difference between compassion and empathy around this, because I feel like it's really important with relation to this conversation. Compassion is, I feel that my own traumatic brain injury this year was like the biggest teacher about compassion for me ever. Of all the classes and trainings and everything, it was laying in the dark in a bed where I couldn't really see or talk or be on screens for many months, and coming into these compassion practices every day, because without them, I couldn't accept what was happening. So there's a practice called Tonglen. It is a Tibetan Buddhist practice, and Tong means to send out, to give, and Len is to accept. And it's spelled Tonglen, Tonglen. And I first learned about it from the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and then was in a 4-year training program that included it with Maria Nemeth. And then I started thinking, like, gosh, I want to keep learning about Tonglen. This is an ancient human technology of the heart. And it has to do with making space inside of us to be with the suffering and the truth. Because as interested as we might be in a better world, if we don't have space inside of us for the truth, we're not going to be able to move towards it. And I want to paint a picture, right? There's a difference between, I'm going to keep dreaming of a better world for us, but I have no attention for how difficult things are right now, right? Like, good luck building that better world from that place, right? Or, oh, I have a commitment and a practice to make space for what is challenging. I am interested in making the space inside myself to be with our history, to be with what's happening in India right now, to be with what's happening in our prison system and police violence right now. I have space to attend to the truth of it so that it can better inform the vision I have for where we could head. That's a very different place to stand, right? That distinction. And so these practices, there are aspects of kink that are compassion capacity practices, right? They are building that internal space that, that one of you just spoke to so beautifully, right? And so I want to speak to come back to compassion and empathy. Sometimes we don't know that difference between compassion and empathy, right? In this particular model, compassion is creating that deep rooted, peaceful, generous presence that has space for suffering to come and be with us. In Tonglen, we talk about it as the metaphor of the suffering is the clouds and your heart is the sky. And rather than, oh, I wish there was less clouds so my sky didn't have to be so big, right? We say, okay, there's more clouds. Oh shit, I just watched the news today. There's even more clouds. Oh wow, I just heard about how my friend is suffering. There's even more clouds, right? let those clouds invite my heart to grow bigger, because those clouds are what is true. So in empathy, it's different. In empathy, sometimes, even with the best of intentions, what happens is we start to match the disharmony of other people in our present system, right? We start to get dysregulated with them in an attempt for solidarity. Like, oh, I'm with you, but yeah, I am really upset about this. I'm going to get, I'm going to create that internal storm to reflect to you that you're not crazy. But in doing so, now everyone's dysregulated. Yes, I'm hearing there's some resonance here, right? And we've been taught that, like, oh yeah, empathy is a go-to, but in practice, we often don't. The end result is often not that everyone feels more connected and present. So compassion is different than empathy. And in compassion, we're saying, okay, I witness and respect your suffering, but my internal present system doesn't need to go be it with you. And in fact, I'm going to go into that frequency of that, similar to that humming that we did earlier. I'm going to go into my roots and my big open heart, and I'm going to be the sky, so your clouds don't take over everything. And when we do that, we actually we remind that person that we're with of the part of them that is also the sky. It's an unspoken thing, but in our bodies we feel it. It's like, when you see a baby and its primary caretaker, whether that it's mom or it's dad or it's amazing, gender non-binary caring person, right? Yeah, and we see that baby nuzzle in and rest into that anchor rooted open heart adult presence. And that is actually the baby inside their presence system is learning, oh, there's a file in here for all is well, even when shit is hard. And over time, that baby starts to learn that file without needing the parent or the caretaker. And so we at this moment in humanity have a profound choice. Every minute of the day, we have a profound choice to join the disharmony that's in the collective, or to choose to move towards the harmony and to radiate that out, and in doing so, to, in a nonverbal way, invite folks into the harmony with us, because that energy is in everyone too.
But so being able to hold that frequency and that resonance is really important. One of my teachers, Norma Ramos, she often says this. It's like, you can get so, like, I gave myself a week where I just dived into my grief around what was happening about India, and I cried and I didn't sleep very well, and I consumed a lot of news, and it felt very important because I didn't want to spiritually bypass and just hang out in my, oh, well, things are better where I am, so everything must be fine. So I confronted the hard truth. But after a week, I had to consciously pull back, and I'm still raising funds for India and checking in on the friends that I have there. So I can still stay engaged, but I'm staying outside of the washing machine because I'm not being so overwhelmed with my grief about how devastating it is there that I'm ineffective in what I'm trying to do, and that my whole life gets overrun. And that can often happen for trauma survivors because the system gets overwhelmed. So I love this word that you use, disharmony, right? Because you are out of harmony, and there can be a place for that. But if that then sweeps you out of being able to be effective, then who are you helping? You're certainly not helping yourself, and then you can't be an advocate for others either, right?
Yeah, it's like a pendulation, like a swinging between resourcing yourself and contributing, right? And if we just stay in contribution, we see this a lot with social justice folks I'm not immune from it. I grew up marching I grew up 10 minutes from the White House, often outside with big political sandwich boards on my body, even when I was 4. Okay. So just like, that was a way I grew up. And it was like, oh yeah, if you're a loving human, this is how you channel it. And it was contribute, contribute, contribute. And when we only do that and we don't resource, it's a very difficult experience, and we can really burn out. And when we only resource, when we only seek pleasure and things that nourish us, but we don't contribute, we can also get a little stagnant, right? And so what's interesting is they feed each other. They feed each other. In fact, for me, when I was in my recovery process and had my brain injury, there were moments where I really didn't think I'd make it. And I didn't know if I had the internal desire to keep healing. And what kept me going was one of my dear, dear friends, who was guiding me, who kept reminding me of the vision I have for this world, and whether or not I had the honor to heal and actively be the teacher and the performer and the artist that I get to be right now, right? I knew that I had that vision for the world, and it was my desire to contribute. And that is why, okay, I'm going to do that self-care because I understand that's the foundation of my ability to contribute to our human family. And that is devotion. That's what calls us forth. Right. And so to bridge this back for a moment to kink, there are times when I might be having a scene with a beloved, and sometimes that beloved is in on this, or sometimes they're not. But I'm going to share with you internally, behind the scenes, right? Okay, anyway, right? Like, I'm going to share with you that for me, when my system is at that edge where there's enough resource and trust that I'm able to experience intensity, and it feels like it's enlivening me and not overtaking me, there's a part of me that says, okay, I'm going to save this file as part of my accumulation of resilience, so that when I am watching the news about India, or when I am in a circle of Black folks who have trusted me to be a part of their movement, there's a internal place a reservoir where I've been accumulating resilience. This is the internal experience of resilience. And so often, whether it's a scene with myself or with another person, there's an element for me that is devoting that resilience, which the kink calls forth in my system, is devoting it to be purpose to my contribution in the world.
So in that sense, could you say your kink is part of your resource in your activism?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. It's like pleasure activist, right? Like, my dear friend and colleague, Adrienne Marie Brown, who wrote the book Pleasure Activism, right? It's very similar. It's like our pleasure has a purpose to it. And to me, that is also arousing to know that it is purposed, right? Purpose can be pleasurable.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So I've had a confidential question come in. The question, it's open to being shared, but they didn't want to be identified. So you and I are using the word resource because we come from a lineage of study that uses this languaging, but they're saying, can you explain resource a little more? I'm trying to understand if those are pure pleasure activities. And I might just jump off first and then have you come in after that. So the way I understand resource as it's used in this particular field of energy study, it's anything that supports you in any way. It could be, I'm going to say a triggering one actually, but it could be family. It could be your pets. For me, it's the sea. It's part of why I'm living where I live. I don't live in a very fancy house, but I have this incredible sea view that I look at as much as possible throughout the day, and that like nourishes me. It could be taking a nap, it could be going on vacation, it could be exploring eros, it could be a resource is say investing in your own education. So those are some ideas of what it could be: a crystal or an altar, or reaching out to a friend for a phone call. That's some of what we mean by resource. And I'd love you to share
Thanks
some
for
more.
that. Those are great examples, and the internal experience of being resourced from some of those examples is more breathing room, a little more perspective. You got a little spaciousness from the thing that was worrying you, and now you're like, oh, right, okay, I'm sitting back and I see that that's just one part of my world, whereas before it was my whole world, right? That's like some of the internal experience of being resourced. Just like we were speaking to subspace earlier, it's that there's more sky for the clouds to be there, right? There's more space for new sensation and experience to happen, and you to stay with it, as opposed to you to go into fighting it, running away, flight, or freeze, right? So when we're not in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, I won't go deep into those, but when we're not in an experience where our system is like, that's enough, right? Resources, oh, there's more space here. Yeah. Does that answer your question, whoever? And thank you for asking these questions. I so appreciate it. Yeah. And part of it is actually the wisdom to learn when is it appropriate to have more resource, right? Like sometimes we don't realize until later, like, oh shit, I am burned out. But maybe a week ago or 5 years ago, right, I could have noticed, like, I need to be resourcing myself more. So I think about it as a garden, right? You don't want to overwater the seeds and you don't want to underwater them. You want to have a nice gentle pulse on how's the moisture doing, right? How's my resource level doing? Do I need a little bit more? I think of resource as breathing room as well as inspiration.
I love that. That's been very relevant for me, having left California after 16 years and moving to Baja, where the pace it's just slower. And my body's loving it. Like I don't even think I've seen a traffic jam in 4 months. Right, I know. You're like jumping through the screen. I am due to come back to the US to get vaccinated, and I will be in the Bay Area, but like I'm going to have to gather the resource that I've been drinking in this time to help me for when I'm at a situation that is more stressful, because I didn't even realize how much I was having to buffer and try and manage. And I'm not judging anybody who's choosing to live, for example, in the Bay Area. It may work for you. It didn't work for my present system. I was having to have too much of this attention, like it was so big that I didn't have the spaciousness for anything else. So calling in this new level of resourcing, more connection to nature, it actually came from something very painful, from being evacuated from the fires last year. I got out of it and I got entangled and I dropped in with trees, and I'm like, oh, I want more of this. I need easier access to this, and I need the sky of nature to be bigger for me than the cement and around my home, the police sirens. So I made a change. So I'm curious, because we are starting to run out of time. So if anybody does have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We've talked a little bit now about kink for the heart and how these different communities can use truth to start speaking to awakening our human family. At least I know those are your words, but can you speak to more about awakening the heart of our human family is? I'm loving the languaging of that, but I want to hear in your words, see what that means for you.
Yeah. um, can I bust out my image now?
Totally. It's a good
I've got a
image.
picture I've been working
Like-
on for y'all.
Show and tell for the exhibitionists, right? So
Yeah,
you can get
this
your
is
kinks
like-
met in many ways.
It's my it's gonna take me a sec, but it's funny. I guess it's my dreamer exhibitionist, right? I want to show you my vision for our worlds. So there it is. Okay, just a sec. So waking the heart of our human family is a community and a practice that I've been building. And this is an image that, can you all see it?
Yes.
This is, okay, I'm trying to get it as big as possible here. So this is an image that I've been working with, and you'll notice on the right side is the culture of abandonment. And I've been really looking at attachment theory, which essentially is, I'm looking at it on the collective level. Often we think about it between two people. What I'm looking at is in what ways maybe have I left behind the human family? Or in what ways have I been left behind by the human family? And that is basically looking at our abandonment of how we and our fellow humans may not feel insecure bonds with each other. So on the right side, you'll see this is the culture of abandonment and some of the ways that that might play out. Feeling jealous. Our desires are really defined by how society is telling us what we're supposed to want or not want. Avoidance, like turning away from things that might be difficult. A fear of eros. It's more of a blame culture because there's not a lot of space for taking responsibility. Entitlement, a sense of us versus them, a lot of divisions, feeling more important than the human family as opposed to part of it, and erasing our ancestors and erasing indigenous people. Like these are unfortunately quite familiar for us living in this culture. And so I was like, all right, well, what do we want to replace that with?
I need to interrupt for a second just so that
Yeah.
our viewers are able to make sure they're understanding everything you're saying.
Please do, yeah.
One of our participants is just asking more if you could define what eros is. Like, is eros just love?
Oh, that's such a great question. Eros is this natural part of us to it's our natural tendency for joy and play and our essence. It may or may not be sexual. Often we think of it as sexual, but for me, eros is this natural tendency we have for delight and joy and a lot of aliveness. Like I'm fully alive. And the sometimes that's mostly with self, and sometimes there's a desire to share it with people. And that's what I think of as eros. And so when we have a fear of eros, it's almost like a fear of our own sensuality and aliveness. Yeah.
I love that expanded definition. Actually, my view of eros was mostly around sexuality. So it's interesting because I've been mulling over this concept of sex magic, which is often, I love teaching it, and I often use it in Neo-Tantra. But my definition of what sex magic is, and we're not going to go into that totally now, come to my Ask Me Anything, be happening a few weeks from now on my Patreon. But it's becoming less and less about sex. It's about harnessing the energy to fuel an intention, which is yoga. They do that all the time. Yoga is not about being a pretzel, twisting yourself into a pretzel. And it is about setting a sankalpa or an intention for your practice and then fueling the practice with that Shakti or with that energy. So it's actually really interesting. I love this. I love your expanded view of what
Thanks.
Eros even is. I hadn't heard that before. So we didn't get to the left part of your slide because I thought that question was really important. Let's go back to that.
Yeah, great. So the other side is that what we're replacing the culture of abandonment with, right? White supremacy culture, culture of oppression with. What are we replacing that with? And that is what I'm calling the culture of humanity. And that's what I've been really hungry to share with more people, right? It's one thing to say all these things aren't working. It's another thing to actually start to build the internal and social culture of something different, something that we're replacing it with. So here you'll see these correspond. Like the top one is inspired admiration. Well, that's what happens on the right side when you look at jealousy and you think, okay, well, if I waken my heart, what really is jealousy? It's inspired admiration. Right? So you'll see, I won't elaborate on each of these, but the ones on the left are what happens when our hearts waken up, when our hearts awaken. They transform what's on the right. So that allows us to drop into, you know, how our soul defines our desires as opposed to them being filtered through our socializations. That is the care, right? When we were talking about Tonglen, we now have the space inside of us to be with suffering. So we actually don't need to try to keep avoiding it. And Eros as wisdom, Eros as a form of wisdom. It's a call to our aliveness and our natural tendency towards joy. And yes, and that this is forgiveness and responsibility and gratitude. And we are human as opposed to us versus them, and that we're part of a human family, and that we are rooted in and honoring our ancestors and re-indigenizing. So that is the new culture. And that culture is actually our nature. It's not like we have to create this all from scratch. What's interesting is as we drop into our hearts, it's already our nature, but there is some unlearning to do of the culture of abandonment.
Wow. Yeah. It's part of why I wanted you to come and speak to my audience, because these concepts are it's like right on the cutting edge, Z, and it blows me away, because especially we've seen, I'm not even going to name who, but especially in the US right now, there's so much in us versus them. There is. And I remember that started becoming, for me anyway, very relevant after the 2016 election. But even in the pandemic, it's still an us versus them. It's like a vaccinated or unvaccinated, or, and I'm not suggesting that vaccines aren't important. I personally believe that they're a huge part of solving, bringing an end to the pandemic. But I love the antidote. I love that you're offering antidotes for some of the things that are really like cancer in our society and degrading deeply spiritual people. And I've noticed even in this year, I've lost friendships with people I love deeply because it became an us and a them. And wow. I know we don't really have time to do the full, dive deeply into the full body of this amazing work that you're bringing forth. But I know that you have a wonderful offering coming up, Rooted Eros, where you're going to be exploring and expanding on these a little more. So please share a little more about what Rooted Eros is, what it looks like, and when it's happening.
Yeah, thank you. Well, just to close the loop, all the Waking the Heart stuff that I've been talking about is going to be happening in the fall. And what's coming up right now next is Rooted Eros. And that is an 8-week erotic rite of passage through dance and community. And it is a space to really connect with our dance, our self-touch, our voice, and to, my sense is that there's a wisdom inside of us of what feeds us, what nourishes us. If we say yes to more aliveness, there's a very unique, specific way that your being, your organism wants that to happen. And this is about making the space for that to become more clear to you and for you to actually explore it creatively, artistically. Like, what is that personal ritual that you want to do to say yes to your next rite of passage? And I will share that this past year has been the most healing year of my life. And it included a peak erotic experience with myself that I did not see coming. It happened in October. I mean, a lot of us have been spending a lot of time with ourselves, you know? So if there was going to be a peak experience, this is a good time for it, right? So yeah, I had this whole peak experience, and now I'm making an erotic dance film out of it, where I am the dom and I am the sub, and I wear different costumes and different makeup, and I literally have a scene with myself. And it came out of this deep journey with myself that has taken months for me to write the poetry of it, to make the dance of it, to make the artistic offering that like says, yes, this happened, right? And so Rooted Eros is that for community. It's like, how do I take what was happening in my own life, my own erotic rite of passage, and then create, yes, it's coming out. It's coming out. And my dear friend and colleague, Lee Harrington, is supporting me with it. And who I know has also been in here. Yes, I see that you know Lee, because I can see, yes. So yeah, that is happening. And I offer it because it's not just about everyone witness my rite of passage. It's about that energy is in all of us. We all have a rite of passage, especially after so much new and unfamiliar things this year. There's some unique way that our aliveness wants to be with us right now. And so this is a community invitation for people who are interested in transformation through dance, for people who are light up about making a personal ritual around it, and people who are interested in community. Like, this is a juicy place to do that. So that's what's coming up.
When is it happening?
So their registration closes on Friday. So this is the last week. I am currently interviewing applicants for it. The program starts in June.
And where can people find out about it? Can you drop a link?
Yes, I will put a link in there. Absolutely.
Learn more about it. It's lovely to hear it in your own languaging. Oh, that's a great question. Is it in person or online?
It is online. We have an international group. I just put the link there. And it'll take you to the Rooted Eros page, which also has my written definition of Eros as well as of Rooted. And it is online. It's 8 weeks online. And I'm doing that, one, because it makes everything simpler with the unpredictable nature of in-person interactions right now. And 2, because there's something really sweet and magical about different privacy choices that Zoom allows. You can decide when you want to be seen and when you want to be heard and when you don't. So that is I'm actually delighting in it as someone who's led circles like this for over 20 years. There's something interesting about doing it on Zoom. And, you know, it's like we get to come with you into your home, into your own temple space or your cave or however you want to call it, right? And you can let us in to the extent that you want to. So that is another reason that I am doing it online. And right now we have a bunch of folks from Europe in it, as well as across the US, and a lot of people who've been working with me for years. It's a really powerful group of folks. So if you're interested, I'm happy to chat more about it with you.
I love Z. There've been many hard things about the past year plus. And one of the things that technology has given us is the ability to be in different places geographically and still connect and learn from teachers perhaps we didn't have access to if we weren't getting on a plane, or, you know, it actually makes the teachings much more accessible. So I love it that you are offering things online. Part of why I'm excited to let you into my home a little bit here, you can sort of see my altar in the background and the hammock where I practice my Spanish. Anyway, and you've had glimpses of the sea view. What's that?
I'm sorry. I think that's hilarious. Your hammock is devoted to your Spanish.
Oh, it's not only devoted to that. No, I've learned. It's been amazing. I've got this new friend, Diego. Mexican people in the Yucatan Peninsula sleep in hammocks. They sleep in them. So when he stays over, He sleeps in the hammock. So it's not just for my Spanish, but he helps me learn Spanish. He corrects. I make so many mistakes. Anyway, I'm only 3 months or 4 months. 4 months in now. Yeah. Anyway, it's getting better. But I'm also excited as things start getting online a little more. I've actually just decided I'm going to stay next season. I'm leaving for hurricane season, which is starting in about a month. But from October, I'll be back. And I have this wonderful porch with sea views, gazing out with open on all sides. And I'm looking forward to teaching in person here. But yeah, next week I will have another one of my teachers. It's been one of my commitments in the pandemic is to really celebrate the amazing people I have in my life, like you, Z. And we have all these fantastic conversations that somehow, you know, sometimes go on for like 2.5 hours. You and I are not that good at concise. I love that about you, by the way, because not everybody has stamina like that, and you and I do. But next week I'm bringing in one of my teachers. She teaches Hatha, Bhakti, Yoga, and Tantra. Her name is Nubia, and I'm not giving you her last name because I don't yet pronounce it correctly. Anyway, she's Jai Uta. I will have it right by next Sunday, I think it is, the 30th. Anyway, she is going to come and talk to us about topics we've talked today about, like devotion and yoga and mudra. Mudra are hand gestures and how you play with all of those energetically. And I'm really honored she's coming. I'm like still blown over. She even said yes. So that will be available for my patrons only. I know there's so much more we can learn from you, Z, like so much more. I feel very blessed that we are friends. I'm very blessed that you came to share a lot of this real I do record all of the events. Sorry, there was a question that came in. I do record all of the events, and the live events are available to all my patrons, and then the recordings are available for people on my Hanuman Heart tier and above, so that if the time difference doesn't work for you, or if the time doesn't work for you, maybe you going to see your family or friends, or you're being out in the world, please do that. Please also do that. It's so exciting to be able to do that. You can watch the recording, but you have to be at some of the upper tiers to be able to do that. But I want to bring us back around to a story I was going to tell, and I got distracted about you, Z. And again, you are welcome to use red. We like negotiating on the fly because we know each other well enough. We can do that.
All right, let's see.
But
it's
related to this class beautifully, because for those of you who saw the image for this class, that or this event, that oh my goodness, that Z really generously shared. Like, it's a personal image, right, from personal play, with an incredible partner of yours that I need to talk about coming in to speak to my patrons. Anyway, I love that you shared such an intimate moment from a scene with someone you were in service to for years and was a beloved. But one day in my living room, can I speak? Do you know where I'm going with this?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay. So there are many different ways we can offer devotion. Like, I have an altar in the background. For me, I offer devotion even to the sea. In India, they worship the rivers. And you can also, the way when I teach kink, I teach it through this lens of devotion. And part of your offering, as you were in service to this person, I won't out them, but to this person, was a series of positions or presentations for them.
Yeah.
Can I keep going?
Yeah.
Yeah. So notice I'm doing this negotiation informally, but it's really beautiful. And it literally, for me, it was like watching ballet. It moved me so deeply. So you had practiced them as an act of service for your dominant, or your, dare I say, master. Can I use that word?
Yeah. I mean, we were using the words master and slave. That was the request.
I'm just checking in with you because we didn't talk about that before we got on the call. But it was this beautiful sequence, almost like watching Surya Namaskar in Hatha Yoga, or like sun salutations, as some in the West might know it. But it was this beautiful presentation of different positions as an offering to your master. And you did this sequence for me, and it was you and I weren't touching. But it was incredibly erotic. It was beautiful. And the devotion was incredible in that. And he wasn't even there to witness at the time, but I could like feel your connection to him. So I'm sharing that story kind of as a like, there's so much more for you guys to discover. But like devotion can look like you sit in front of an altar and you light a candle and you do puja in the traditional, I practice Tantra, so in the very traditional form, which has very specific rules. Or it can look totally unconventional on a weekday in someone's living room where you're sharing erotic service and it's fully clothed. And to me looks like ballet or yoga, literally. So if you're keen to know more, Z is amazing on so many levels. I wish we had 5 hours. You and I could probably do 5 hours, but I'm not sure everybody else would be able to keep up with us.
Breaks.
Would we? When do you and I ever take breaks? In a classroom setting, I always have to put it in my notes. Oh yeah, the break for the participants, because I would just go. I mean, we might need a break for lunch, but anyway, I know you take wonderful care. You're very good at self-care with your students, and I'm very excited to see how you support the shift in our cultural paradigm with the work you keep bringing to the world.
Thank you. So grateful to be here with you and bring this conversation that's so in my heart to more people, and really open to staying in touch with folks if you have questions. And whether or not I get to see you again in some future event, thanks for taking the time to enter my dreams with me today through this conversation.